Welcome to this week's Insights. This is your host, Eric Hacopian. Today we're going to be discussing two primary topics. One is to update you about the upcoming elections and the campaigns that are going on all around the country. And the second one would be the very disturbing news that we received on Monday about arrests that have been made of Armenian military and volunteer detachment members and commanders of spying for the Azeri intelligence services during last year's war in Artsakh. Let's start off with the elections. The official period of the campaign has started, in which you can openly run and advocate for people to vote for you. This is the last 12 days. So we are in the heart of campaign season. It's very clear from watching the campaign that there are two primary campaigns, and in many ways this is becoming a binary campaign between the current camp of the current government, the Pashinyan camp, and the Kocharyan camp and his coalition that's running against him. Obviously, these two camps also have the greatest amount of resources, and they are running the most vigorous campaigns. To watch the rhetoric and to hear the messaging, it's very easy to be quite disappointed. There's absolutely nothing going on as far as outlining particular positions, talking about particular issues, whether it is the future of Artsakh, whether it is healthcare policy, education policy, defense policy. We hear none of that. It is petty personal attacks. Some of it, frankly, some of the rhetoric is really embarrassing. This week, the former president, Kocharyan, challenged the current prime minister to a duel. And he responded by actually taking the rhetoric even further down by saying he'll show up without a weapon and with the Armenian people, and then offering to trade his son for the hostages that we have in Baku. So to say the least, this rhetoric has not been particularly enlightening or useful. It's been quite disappointing and I think should be generally universally condemned. We are scheduled to have debates which were going to happen, I think, 2 days before the election. And this in and of itself has become an issue because 10 of the parties are refusing to come, despite the fact that the prime minister himself challenged the former three other presidents to show up for a debate that they rejected. I'm not interested in the particular details of who's coming and what, but to say not to showing up at a debate is actually a disservice to the public at large, because people, given all the petty rhetoric that's going on in the campaign trail, need to have a chance to hear the candidates specifically or where they stand on the real issues. So I think not participating in debates is actually a disservice to the Armenian public. Moving on to other campaign news, I want to deal with some of the accusations and rhetoric that's going on, which is, I think, frankly, quite credible on both sides. The prime minister's campaign is being accused of using administrative resources, and there's been lots of writing about that. Frankly, this is an accusation that gets made against every incumbent democratic government anywhere in the world, because once you have administrative resources or you're the head of the state, it's very easy to use them and to be accused of them. The opposition, in the case of Mr. Kocharyan and the former President Sarkisian, I've heard countless reports of going back to their old methods of offering to buy votes or make loans, essentially to spend money around the country, especially in the poorer regions of the country, to gain votes. But none of this, frankly, comes with any definitive proof for anyone. Do I guess it's happening? I suspect it is, but we will never know the scale of it. And I would highly doubt anyone will ever talk about it in a way that is reportable. One of the things that we need to look at is obviously being a very contested election and that these accusations going around about how the system actually works and what are the risks of fraud. It's very important to understand this. The actual election day process is actually quite well done, and it's actually quite fair. All parties have representatives in every precinct. They're there at the count, at the end of the count, and every precinct location is tied to a CCTV camera, so you can actually watch the whole voting process and the counting process done at the end of the day. In fact, the way it's done is after the vote is completed, the ballots are opened, and in front of everyone, they're tallied and divided into piles about who voted for what, and they are reported. Electoral fraud that happens in Armenia does not happen at the ballot box, and it doesn't involve ballot stuffing. It usually involves having large employers or state employers pressure people to vote in a specific way in advance. And I've heard things such as employers forcing their staff to take photos of their ballots before they turn it in to sort of proof about how they voted. So I think we need to be careful of what we're looking for. The fraud is done in a much more sophisticated way, and it is not done at the polling station. Regardless of that, I think we need to be wary of any of these stories being used to entirely delegitimize the electoral process. We're going to have lots of people watching this process, including a representative of all political parties, plus foreign observers. And why is this important? I think we cannot allow a situation, if in fact the vote is done properly and fairly, for the losing side to delegitimize the electoral process. Because at the end of the day, the process itself is far more important than the individuals that win. Within every democratic system, there are actually political actors who partake in the democratic system who are actually not democratic themselves, i.e. they will use the process if they win, and they will try to delegitimize the process if they lose. We have seen this in countless places around the world, whether it was Donald Trump last year in the United States, whether it was recently last week, the Israeli Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, is demanding his supporters to come out to essentially stop him from losing office. And it's a very famous statement by Turkish President Erdogan, who said democracy is a train, and once it gets you to the station that you want, you get off of it. Well, we don't want to get off that station. The process for us is far more important than the individuals that win. So I think if these results are deemed credible, especially by international observers and local observers, we should not allow anyone to delegitimize this process for their purposes. Moving on to our second topic of the week, it's the news that we received on Monday that the NSS, which is the National Security Service, arrested multiple individuals, both in army units and in volunteer detachments, both commanders and individuals who have been accused and in many cases admitted for spying for the Azeri intelligence services. Obviously, this is quite disturbing. To be honest, we have heard reports such as this since the war ended and frankly, prior to the war ending. I have been reluctant to talk about this because all of this was speculation, and we should not be spreading rumors if there are no facts behind it. The other thing that we need to note is, I think, even though I'm 100% confident that these events took place, I think the timing of this is somewhat politically suspicious. Obviously, these arrests are helpful to the Prime Minister's cause because it shows that, the defeat in the war was not his fault, and it actually involved other people. So I think we need to be wary of where these come from. However, I don't think there's any question that there were multiple cases like this that's been reported by different individuals during the course of the war. Regardless of the motivations of the timing of this announcement, it is very clear that over the years, probably over multiple years, Azeri intelligence services, likely working with Turkish intelligence services, recruited dozens and dozens of people in Armenia to help them in their efforts. What these people are being specifically charged with, which makes it even far more disturbing, is to give real-time information about troop positions, specifically in the Hadrut region, i.e. giving coordinates of where artillery positions are, where our rocket systems are, to make it easier for the other side to attack them and destroy them. Given the very strange circumstances in the way Hadrut and Shushi fell, none of this should come as a surprise to anyone. One thing that all of this leads to is a lot of questions about the NSS itself. Obviously, we're all glad that all of these people have been arrested and they're being charged if they're in fact guilty of what they have been accused of. However, the question becomes, where was the NSS all of this time, where all of this was going on? Obviously, these are efforts that took years. These people were recruited and put together over many years. So the issue is, why weren't they caught? Why weren't these communications detected? Why weren't these suspicious travels back and forth to Turkey noted? It is not enough to prosecute them afterwards. We need to ask why they weren't caught beforehand. Secondly is, obviously, treachery is not genetic. If they were able to find people on our side that were willing to sell out their country, I cannot imagine that in a regime like Aliyev's, there weren't many people, many individuals that be willing to do the same for our side. Were our intelligence services involved in recruiting any of these people? I suspect not. So we need to ask, why not, if the other side is penetrating our society, that our intelligence services are not attempting to do the same? Lastly, we need to ask ourselves the uncomfortable question in this process. If these cases are actually true, we need to ask ourselves, why were there so many people in volunteer detachments, in people in uniformed personnel of the military that were willing to sell out their country for 30 pieces of silver? I will never attempt to excuse the actions of any of these people, because if they are guilty as charged, as far as I'm concerned, all of them could rot in hell. I don't care about them. However, they are somewhat revealing of who we are and where our society has been for the past 30 years. I think if you're going to look at this critically and try to learn from it, the one thing to learn is that ordinary citizens are not very good at listening to their leaders, but they're very good at copying them. So for 30 years, we've had a political, economic, cultural leadership that has been busy betraying the country, looting it. It is not hard to imagine that morally weak or degenerate individuals can use that as a license to sell out their country. On the final note, what does all of this mean? What this means is that we need to be willing to look at ourselves in the mirror in the harshest light and not blink. We need to not make excuses. More importantly, we should not have any illusions about who we are and where we are. We have a difficult road ahead, but all good things that are going to come are going to start after we get rid of our illusions and look at ourselves and our motivations at the harshest light. Thank you for joining me in this week's editions of Insights.